It was supposed to be a second chance at love. A pastor healing from heartbreak, and a woman who'd spent years praying for someone to see her. But within 48 hours of their vows, he was found dead in the very bed meant for their honeymoon. Police said it was natural, but behind that hotel door lay secrets of money, betrayal, and a marriage that was never what it seemed. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. In the spring of 2017, in a quiet corner of rural Ohio, Pastor David Collins was known as the man who held his community together. At 52 years old, he'd weathered his own storm. 5 years earlier, his wife of 23 years had passed away from cancer, leaving him to raise their teenage daughter alone, while still shepherding a congregation of 300 faithful members. David was the kind of man who showed up when families lost loved ones, when marriages crumbled, when addiction threatened to tear homes apart. He preached forgiveness on Sundays and lived it every other day of the week. His sermons were simple, honest, rooted in grace. People trusted him because he never pretended to be perfect. He'd talk openly about his grief, his loneliness, the weight of trying to be strong for everyone else while his own heart was still mending. And then there was Marilyn Tate. 43 years old, roughly 500 pounds, she'd worked as the church custodian for nearly 3 years. She was quiet, almost invisible. She came in early, left late, kept the sanctuary spotless, and rarely spoke unless spoken to. Most members didn't know much about her except that she lived alone in a small rental on the edge of town and had no family nearby. But David noticed her. Not because she stood out, but because she didn't. He saw the way she lowered her eyes when people passed, the way she ate lunch alone in the fellowship hall, the way she flinched at loud voices. So he started saying good morning, asking how she was, sitting with her during Wednesday night suppers. And slowly, over months, Marilyn began to smile. Their friendship grew in the margins, a shared joke while folding bulletins, a conversation about favorite hymns while she mopped the aisles. David began inviting her to join small group Bible studies, and Marilyn, for the first time in years, felt seen. She started dressing a little brighter, speaking a little louder. She told David about her childhood in foster care, about years of rejection because of her weight, about praying every night for someone who would love her for who she was. And David, still aching from his own loss, found comfort in her gentleness. He admired her resilience. He saw her faith as pure, unshaken, despite a life that had given her every reason to doubt. By the fall, their friendship had shifted into something more. David asked her to dinner, then another. Within 3 months, he was telling close friends he was in love. But not everyone was convinced. His daughter, Emma, 20 years old and home from college for Thanksgiving, pulled him aside one evening. "Dad, I'm happy you're not alone anymore. But don't you think this is moving fast? You barely know her." David brushed it off. "I know her heart, Em. That's what matters." His associate pastor, Thomas, voiced concerns too. "David, I love that you see the good in people, but Marilyn doesn't talk about her past. No family at all? No friends outside this church? Doesn't that feel strange to you?" David grew defensive. "She's been hurt, Tom. She's been rejected her whole life. I'm not going to be another person who makes her feel like she's not enough." By February, David proposed. It was small, private, just the two of them in the church garden after evening prayer. Marilyn cried so hard she could barely say yes. The wedding was planned for late March, just 6 weeks away. Emma tried one more time. "Dad, please, just slow down. Get to know her family. Ask more questions." But David was resolute. "This is my life, Emma, and I'm choosing love." The wedding took place on a Saturday afternoon in the very sanctuary where they'd met. Fewer than 30 people attended. Marilyn had no family present. When asked, she said they'd passed away years ago. No friends either. Just a few co-workers from a previous job she claimed had moved out of state. David's side filled the pews with concerned but supportive faces. After the ceremony, the newlyweds drove 2 hours to a modest hotel near the Indiana border for a weekend honeymoon. That night, one of the wedding guests, a woman named Carol, who'd known David for years, couldn't shake a moment that had stuck with her. During the reception, she'd seen Marilyn on her phone, texting furiously, her face tense and unreadable. When David approached, Marilyn quickly tucked the phone away and smiled. Carol thought it was odd but said nothing. 2 days later, she'd wish she had. Monday morning, March 27th, housekeeping entered room 214 of the Fairway Inn just after 11 a.m. They found Pastor David Collins unresponsive in bed, still in his pajamas, covers pulled to his chest. Marilyn was sitting in a chair by the window, staring out at the parking lot. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply looked at the housekeeper and said, "I think he's gone." Paramedics arrived within minutes, but David had been dead for hours. His body was cool to the touch. Rigor mortis had already set in. Marilyn told police that David had complained of chest pains the night before, that he'd taken some medication and gone to sleep. She said she woke up around 6 a.m. and realized he wasn't breathing, but didn't call 911 because she was in shock. The initial assessment seemed straightforward. David was 52, overweight, under significant emotional stress from the whirlwind marriage. The medical examiner noted no signs of trauma, no defensive wounds, no struggle. Preliminary ruling, cardiac arrest, likely natural causes. But then the details started to unravel. A detective named Karen Prosser was assigned to write up the report. As she walked through the hotel room, she noticed David's wallet on the nightstand was open, but empty. No cash, no credit cards. Marilyn claimed he'd only brought $20. His phone was missing. Marilyn said she didn't know where it was, and when Prosser asked Marilyn about their finances, Marilyn handed her a life insurance document. It was dated March 23rd, 2 days before the wedding. David had taken out a $200,000 policy. Marilyn was the sole beneficiary. Prosser's instincts kicked in. "Mrs. Collins, when did your husband sign this?" Marilyn blinked slowly. "A few days ago. He wanted to make sure I was taken care of. He was always thinking ahead like that." Prosser nodded, but said nothing. Back at the station, she pulled David's financial records. The policy had been purchased online using David's credit card, but the email confirmation had been sent to an address David had never used before, an address registered under Marilyn's name. The coroner agreed to hold off on releasing the body. Prosser requested a full toxicology screen, and she started digging into Marilyn's past. What Detective Prosser found made her blood run cold. Marilyn Tate wasn't Marilyn Tate, or at least she hadn't always been. In 2009, she'd gone by Mary Ann Taylor in Kentucky. She'd been engaged to a man named Richard Calloway, a retired mechanic with a modest pension. 3 months after their engagement, Richard died suddenly. Heart failure, the coroner said. Mary Ann inherited $75,000. In 2012, she resurfaced in Tennessee as Lisa Tate. She'd been dating a man named Gerald Hoskins, a widower who owned a small hardware store. Gerald died in his sleep 6 months into their relationship. No autopsy. Lisa Tate collected $40,000 from a life insurance policy Gerald had recently changed to include her. Now, in 2017, she was Marilyn Tate, and Pastor David Collins was dead. Prosser contacted authorities in Kentucky and Tennessee. Both cases had been closed, ruled natural, but neither had involved a deep investigation. Prosser obtained copies of the old case files. In both instances, the women had no prior connection to the men until shortly before their deaths. In both cases, there were financial transactions that raised questions, but were never pursued. Bank records showed that after each death, Marilyn, or whatever name she was using, had moved states within weeks and opened new accounts. Prosser brought Marilyn in for a second interview. Marilyn, I need to ask you about your previous relationships. Marilyn's face didn't change. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm talking about Richard Calloway and Gerald Hoskins. Marilyn's lips pressed into a thin line. Those were a long time ago. I loved them. They died. That's all. And both of them left you money. Is that a crime? They cared about me. They wanted me to be okay. Prosser leaned forward. Marilyn, 3 men, 3 sudden deaths, 3 life insurance payouts. You see how this looks, don't you? Marilyn's voice dropped to a whisper. I didn't kill anyone. But her hands were shaking. The woman the pastor thought he knew didn't even exist, and she had a pattern that no one saw coming. The toxicology report came back 3 weeks later. David's bloodstream showed lethal levels of insulin and traces of a powerful sedative called Ambien. David wasn't diabetic. He'd never been prescribed Ambien. Prosser obtained David's medical records. No history of sleep medication, no prescriptions in his name. But there was a prescription in Marilyn's name, filled 4 days before the wedding at a pharmacy 30 miles from the church. She'd picked up a 30-day supply of Ambien. When confronted, Marilyn claimed she'd been having trouble sleeping due to wedding stress. Did you give any of that medication to David? No. He said he was tired. He took some aspirin. That's all I know. But the forensic team found something else. In Marilyn's purse, tucked inside a makeup bag, were 2 empty insulin vials. Marilyn insisted she didn't know how they got there. She claimed someone must have planted them. Prosser pulled phone records. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Marilyn had been in constant contact with a man named Kyle Brennan. Kyle was 38, lived in Michigan, and had met Marilyn online 2 years earlier. They'd had an on-and-off relationship. Prosser tracked him down. Kyle admitted he and Marilyn had been involved but claimed they'd broken up months ago. She told me she was done with me, said she found someone better. But text messages told a different story. 2 weeks before the wedding, Marilyn had sent Kyle a photo of David's bank statements. Look at this. He's got over $100,000 in savings, plus the church pension. Kyle's reply, so what are you waiting for? A week before the wedding. Can't wait till this is over. We'll have the money soon. Kyle tried to backtrack. I didn't mean anything by that. She was always talking big. I didn't think she'd actually do anything. But the messages were damning. Marilyn had sent Kyle photos of the insurance policy. She joked about how easy it was to get David to trust her. And the night of David's death, just hours before he stopped breathing, she'd texted Kyle, "It's done. I'll call you tomorrow." That's when investigators realized this wasn't an accident. This was a plan. Marilyn was arrested on April 15, 2017, and charged with first-degree murder. The news tore through the small Ohio town like wildfire. People who'd sat in the pews with her, who'd prayed beside her, who'd welcomed her into their faith community, couldn't believe it. The church split. Half the congregation believed Marilyn was being framed, that the evidence was circumstantial, that a woman of her size and gentle demeanor couldn't possibly have committed such a calculated crime. The other half felt betrayed, horrified that someone had infiltrated their sanctuary with such intent. David's daughter, Emma, was shattered. She'd tried to warn her father. She'd sensed something was wrong, and now he was gone, and she had to live with the guilt of not pushing harder. The trial began in October. The prosecution painted Marilyn as a predator who targeted vulnerable, lonely men, gained their trust, and then eliminated them for financial gain. They presented the trail of aliases, the prior deaths, the insulin, the text messages with Kyle. They brought in a forensic toxicologist who testified that the combination of Ambien and insulin would have rendered David unconscious within 30 minutes and stopped his heart within hours. The defense argued that Marilyn was a victim herself, a woman who'd been manipulated by Kyle Brennan, who'd convinced her that David would be better off dead because he was suffering from depression and financial stress. They claimed she'd been coerced, that she loved David, and that her actions were the result of psychological abuse. But the text messages contradicted that narrative. There was no evidence of coercion, only evidence of planning. On November 3rd, after 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict. Guilty of second-degree murder. Marilyn showed no emotion. She simply stared straight ahead as the judge sentenced her to 25 years to life. Kyle Brennan was charged as an accessory and sentenced to 12 years. What began as a love story had become a tragedy that tore a church in half. How would you feel if someone you trusted, someone you opened your heart to, turned out to be someone entirely different? What would you do if you realized the person sleeping beside you had been planning your death? These aren't just questions for this story. They're questions for all of us. In the months following the trial, the church where David had preached for over 15 years struggled to rebuild. Attendance dropped. Families left, unable to reconcile the horror of what had happened in a place they'd once felt safe. Thomas, the associate pastor, took over David's role, but it wasn't the same. He spent his first sermon addressing the congregation directly. Evil doesn't always look like evil. Sometimes it looks like someone in need, someone asking for help, someone we want to believe in. And that's not a weakness, that's humanity. David's heart was open because that's who he was. He saw the good in people. And yes, that openness cost him his life, but it also saved dozens of others. We can't let this tragedy close us off from love. We have to honor David by continuing to believe in grace, even when grace is hard. Emma Collins sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face. After the service, she stood at the pulpit and spoke about her father. He wasn't perfect. He made a mistake. But he made it because he believed in second chances. He believed people could change. And I'm not going to let Marilyn Tate take that away from his memory. The community slowly began to heal. A scholarship fund was established in David's name for children from foster care, the very background Marilyn had used to manipulate him. Over 5 years, the fund helped over 30 kids attend college. Marilyn, meanwhile, sat in a women's correctional facility in central Ohio. She received letters from a few church members, some angry, some pleading for answers. She never responded to most of them, but in 2021, a journalist reached out, requesting an interview. Marilyn agreed. In the interview, she admitted to killing David. She claimed she'd never meant for it to go that far, that Kyle had pressured her, that she'd been desperate and saw no other way out of poverty. But when asked about Richard and Gerald, she went quiet. "I love them," she said. "I didn't hurt them." The journalist pressed. "But the patterns are identical. The insurance policies, the sudden deaths, the moves across state lines." Marilyn looked directly into the camera. "If I could turn back time, I'd choose honesty over hope. I'd tell David the truth about who I was. Maybe he would have helped me. Maybe he would have walked away, but at least he'd be alive." In the end, justice came, but not peace. Because love built on lies can only end in loss. Pastor David Collins believed love could heal all wounds. He believed in forgiveness, in redemption, in seeing the best in people even when they'd been hurt by the worst. And in many ways, that belief defined his entire life. He helped marriages on the brink of collapse find their way back. He walked beside addicts through recovery. He sat with grieving parents and reminded them they weren't alone. But sometimes, love blinds us to the truth staring right in front of us. Sometimes, the very thing that makes us human, our capacity for trust, becomes the weapon someone else uses against us. 5 years after David's death, the church held a memorial service. They planted a tree in the garden where he'd proposed to Marilyn, not as a reminder of his death, but as a symbol of his life, a life rooted in grace. Emma spoke again, older now, steadier. "My dad taught me that love is a risk. And yes, he paid the ultimate price for that risk. But I refuse to live in a world where we stop taking chances on people, where we stop believing in second chances, because if we do that, then Marilyn wins, and I won't let her win." The congregation sang his favorite hymn, "Amazing Grace," and as the last note faded, the sun broke through the clouds. It felt for just a moment like David was there, still believing, still forgiving, still loving. So what do you think really happened that night? Was this premeditated murder from the very beginning, or was it a tragic mix of love, desperation, and deceit? Was Marilyn a monster, or a broken woman who made a deadly mistake? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story hit you like it did us, hit that like button. It helps us reach more people who love deep, real-life mysteries. And don't forget to subscribe. We share gripping true stories every week. Stories that make you think. Stories that make you feel. Stories that remind us all how fragile trust can be. Because in love and crime, truth always finds its way to the light.